Recently, I almost lost my entire harvest, and I want to tell you about it. Y'all know that I like to use CO2 in my grow. I made a change from the CO2 tanks to the CO2 burner, trying to save some money, and I got burnt. I'm going to tell you all about it, but before we do, this video is brought to you by Real Growers Recharge. If you want stronger, healthier plants, you got to check out Recharge. Recharge grows bigger roots for better fruit. So check it out over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420. It'll get you 20% off your first order. And come on, let's talk some grow. I see you ready?
I am ready. So I was here when this happened. You showed me the plants, and I was like, what went wrong?
This is new information. I just figured this out.
Okay, so first of all, we're big proponents on the channel here. We love using CO2 in the grow. It's one of the best ways to get the most out of your grow. So you've always got CO2 going. Yeah,
I can either turn my lights up really crazy and have a big electricity bill and then have a big air conditioning electricity bill because I've got to cool them, or I can add a little bit of CO2 in there and get great performance results.
Okay, but you ran out of CO2 and you thought you could save a little bit money. What led to this?
CO2 is a pain in the butt. You got to find a place that either a welding supply or a grow store that will replace or exchange your CO2 containers. You have to buy them in the beginning. I think they're $100, $150 to buy them just so you can exchange them. When you run out, the grow store or wherever the heck you get it better be open at that time. So it can be a pain in the butt. I think I have 4. I'm up to 4 CO2 tanks. That's how slack I am.
Okay, and the way that we usually do it, you just have the CO2 tank in the grow room, and you've got like a regulator on there letting out a little bit of CO2 at a time.
And that's clean CO2, nothing else in there.
Okay, but this last harvest, you decided to go back to something you used to do, which was
a CO2 burner. And the cool thing about a CO2 burner is I actually have propane at my house. My house is run by propane. There's a gas station down the street that will exchange or fill up my propane tank for, I don't even know how much it costs. Probably $40 these days. I don't know. But it's really convenient. If you run out of CO2, you can just run down it and fix that.
And so CO2 burner means a propane tank, and you're burning that propane, and that does what?
It creates CO2 and water, basically H2O.
Okay, so burning natural gases we always hear about, that creates greenhouse CO2 gases.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does.
But we want that in the grow.
We want that in the grow, all right? We're keeping that in the grow, and I guess theoretically, if I was trying to make myself feel better about it, the plants are eating that CO2. They're ripping off the carbon, and they're releasing the oxygen. So at least we're using the CO2, okay? We're not just letting it float out into the air.
Right. But it's not just water and CO2 that when you burn propane, you're getting.
And just remember, I started by saying I almost lost my entire grow. My grow was doing great. I put the burner up. I went in there 2 days later, and my plants just looked like they might die.
Okay, so I know this because we used to have a house that was ran on propane as well.
Sure.
It's not just propane in there because propane is odorless. That's kind of dangerous if you have a leak. So they add something to it to make it smell so you can tell if you have a leak.
Yes, and I barely know the name of this stuff. I had to do some research. Is it ethyl methyl?
Ethyl mercaptan, I think.
Ethyl mercaptan, okay, and a fancy word. I just did some research on it, and what I found out is when ethyl mercaptan, that's the odor smell, right? What's that smell like? It
smells kind of like sulfur.
It's sulfurous, right?
Gross, gassy,
yeah, it's something. So when that stuff burns, there's just a tiny bit in it in the propane or the natural gas, so you can detect a gas leak. Well, when that burns, it just becomes a very small amount of sulfur dioxide, sulfur and oxygen.
Okay, so when you're running a propane CO2 burner, you're not just getting CO2 and water, you're also releasing sulfur dioxide into the air as well.
Yeah, I think me and you were talking about it. You got sulfur dioxide. Isn't that acid rain?
Yeah.
And it is acid rain because sulfuric acid, sulfur diluted in water makes sulfuric acid.
Yeah, so basically you're adding acid rain to your grow environment.
Yes, so all that little film of water that is over your plants, now it has acid, it's acidic, it has acid rain in there.
All right, so we've got this acid rain, sulfuric acid on the leaf surface, what does that lead to in your grow?
I mean, I would call it leaf injury, but your leaves shriveling up and just looking terrible. Sometimes there's necrosis or necrotic spots, which are just death spots on there. And generally just a significant decrease in their ability to photosynthesize. So it harms your leaves. It could even kill your plant. We didn't have it kill our plants, but I had it really mess mine up to where if it was on a schedule or if I had backup plants, I might just throw them out. It really did that much damage.
Okay, so I'm thinking of scale-wise. If I got a 2x4 or a really small grow room, I would not ever have to consider not using CO2, but all the stuff we've been talking about, where would it ever make sense to move away from CO2 and use this CO2 burner, this propane burner? Why would you ever want to do that in the first place?
CO2 is expensive. So if you're scaling up, if you got a big garage or a two-car garage, which a lot of our friends have, or even bigger, it costs a lot of money. It's very inefficient if you're going to try to do that with tanks. So by getting, say you get even if you just had a few propane tanks that you're just exchanging, it just makes it quite a bit more convenient and quite a bit less expensive.
And a lot more low profile. If I'm dragging in a bunch of CO2 tanks versus a couple of propane tanks, one is a lot less suspicious.
Yes. I mean, I got really good at rolling an 80-pound CO2 tank into my garage really efficiently, man.
Okay, so maybe I'm growing in like an unfinished basement or a two-car garage. It's just not, it doesn't make sense to be using CO2 tanks.
Right.
I'm going to go with the propane CO2 burner.
Yes.
But I don't want to have sulfuric acid. What's the best way to mitigate this potential disaster?
And this came with a lot of thinking back on my part, because I've used a ton of burners in grows back in the day, but it was Prohibition days. So I also used carbon filters. I would use what's called a scrubber inside the room.
To get rid of the smell?
To get rid of the smell, yeah. Turns out, if you think about it, carbon filters, activated carbon, is a really good way to scrub sulfur when they're not CO2. If so, everybody be running CO2 carbon scrubbers, you know. But sulfur, it's able to adsorb. It sticks to the carbon. The carbon's got crazy amounts of surface area. That's the difference, though. I don't run a carbon filter as a scrubber inside my room, so I wasn't scrubbing or getting rid of any of the sulfur dioxide in there. I have a small room. I'm in a 6x12 room. I run a lot of CO2. It didn't take very long for that 1,500 ppm of CO2 with the little bit of the sulfur dioxide in there, sulfur in the air, to make just a little bit of sulfuric acid enough to mess up my plants.
So at scale, if you're growing a lot of plants, it makes sense to use the propane CO2 burner. But if you're not using a carbon filter to scrub the air inside of the grow, you risk poisoning your plants, basically.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. That's the big difference, is the carbon filter.
Okay, so in a small grow, maybe like a grow tent, use the filter on the outside, use the carbon filter on the outside of your tent to prevent the smell. But if you're growing in a upscaled grow environment, how many plants do you think where you might want to consider, instead of using carbon, switching over to a carbon burner or a propane burner?
Man, I don't know. Plants is a tough thing, but if you had a one-car garage, if you were in a 10 or 12 by 20 room, 22-car garage.
Or anything bigger than that.
Yeah, for larger scale, you know, for very small scale, a burner and a regulator and a tank is fine. But when you scale up, it usually is a lot more efficient to use a burner. And when you use a burner, just make sure that you're using a carbon filter in the room, and you should be all right. But what about you? Have you ever used a CO2 burner? Have you ever gotten similar problems with it? I'd love to know in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit that thumbs up. Please press that subscribe button and check out the other couple videos YouTube's recommended.